Good morning. Today I'm speaking with the Venerable Ward 8 Councilperson, Andrea Jenkins. Good morning.
Good morning, Venerable. I haven't heard that term for a while.
Well, you've been there since 2017 was the election, right?
Yes.
And we were opponents at that time, but I think we've had a lot of conversations since then, and I've admired, I think, your thoughtfulness on the council. So I'm excited to have you meeting with me, and I appreciate it. You're one of the first to be my second guest. I think
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah. And I think your dog has gotten a little older since we spoke, which was probably last year sometime. I don't remember when exactly.
Yeah, it had to be like in late August or September
Yeah.
because he was a baby. I think I had just gotten him, and I know, yeah, he came home with me in August. So,
So is is your dog a chewer? Mine is driving me crazy. We've had her, I think we must have gotten her a little bit after you got your dog, and she's still chewing things up.
well, no, he doesn't. He doesn't chew up my stuff per se. He's gotten into a couple of things, but I still have all my shoes. My shoestrings are frayed. But he kind of chews on his toys mostly. He is a chewer, and this morning he's been nipping at me for actually all week. He's been nipping at me, which is a new thing, like trying to bite my hand.
Huh. Well,
Have you
mine,
experienced that yet?
well, so when I play ball with my dog, she's sometimes my fingers will get caught between the ball and her teeth, and that smarts quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, and I've had that, but now he's like literally going for my hand.
You don't bite the hand that feeds you, isn't that the old
That's the
phrase?
frame. But also this week he hasn't been eating very much. So he's like, okay, since I'm not eating, I guess I can bite the hand.
Well, I'm sure that
But
will
yeah,
work its
it's
way
been a
out.
fun journey raising a little puppy though. I like it. What kind of puppy did you guys get?
She's an Anatoli Shepherd, which is like a this Turkish mountain dog, I think. I mean, some sort of mix. I don't know exactly, but
Is it a rescue or?
yeah, she is. Yeah, it was actually the city did they periodically do kind of a dog special at animal control where you can get a dog with no fees. So
Yeah.
we did that. So she didn't cost anything to take home, but then of course immediately she started to cost money because she got bit by something like maybe a raccoon or something, and so her legs got all swollen, and we had to go to the vet and get her on antibiotics, and
Oh,
so you know, even if you get a free dog, they're not free.
yeah, right. Yeah, no, yeah, tell me about it. My bank account is getting busted up with this puppy, man. Um,
Well,
yeah.
so let's jump in and start talking a little bit about Ward 8, and maybe you could tell me, some community news about what's going on. You know more than anyone, really.
Yeah, I don't, yeah, I do kind of have the opportunity to look across the whole ward. I think Ward 8, I love Ward 8. I've been working in Ward 8, as you know, for 8 years on the city council and 15 years prior to that. So, um, and I've seen lots of configurations of the Eighth Ward. It was funny. I was listening to the speeches last week, and Steve Brandt said that there was a time when they didn't live in the Eighth Ward, although they didn't move.
Yeah. Well, that was
But
why we had that special election, well, kind of the 2 years ago, right? Because the ward boundaries had changed. So that's why this election is for now for 4 years, but the previous one was only for two, isn't there?
2 years, yeah, yeah, you're right. There were two 2-year terms, right? So, um, but yeah, that's kind of to mitigate some of the consternation that comes from redistricting. But some of the things that I guess one of the things that is really happening. This is May 2025, and it's represents the fifth anniversary commemoration of the murder of George Floyd. And so there will be a lot of activities going on in George Floyd Square. It is, it's sad, and yet I think, as a community, as as Black folks, people want to acknowledge the pain, but also um, exhibit some joy, right? And so there will be 3 days of activities going on in George Floyd Square. Um, it'll kick off, and it's being hosted by a group called Rise and Remember, which was formulated after the murder of George Floyd to preserve the artwork, the offerings um, that people have left in the square in commemoration of George Floyd. Um, so their hosts, and it starts out with a banquet or a gala on Thursday night, I think May 23rd or 22nd. Maybe it's the 23rd. And then there will be like a festival type scenario in George Floyd Square, with vendors and musicians and face painting and t-shirts, the whole
Yeah.
festival kind of thing. And then I think on Sunday there will be more of a somber, religious, sort of spiritual kind of celebration with gospel singers and ministers speaking, etc. So, kind of looking forward to that, and I hope that, the whole ward and certainly other people from around the city would join in and participate in those activities. Um, I've been spending a lot of time in the square lately. Some reasons is that the media is contacting from all around the country. And so they want to, I mean, I've met with the New York Times, I've met with NBC News, NPR, National Public Radio, Star Tribune, like all of these news outlets and NPR. I'm meeting with them on Monday. And
So,
they all want to kind of hang out at the square and talk about, what has changed over the past 5 years, etc. Um,
so obviously there's been a lot of, I guess, written about the influence that Trump is having on the media. I mean, when these people contact you, do you think they're coming with any kind of agenda, or are they just really looking for a local voice to give context to what occurred?
yeah, I think they're looking for local voices. Yeah, I don't sense any kind of got you or, trickery or chicanery or anything like that. I think that, people sort of sincerely want to check in, and namely because I think Minneapolis, in terms of police reform, racial justice, has kind of become a barometer, if you will, for the rest of the country. So, I could be naive, Terry, but I get the sense that people are, straightforward, trying to get some sense of, what is happening, what's going on, what's changed. And the question in and of itself, what has changed, is a little
Difficult to answer, I would guess.
right. It is, because there's been a lot that has changed, and certainly there's a lot that has stayed the same. And you invoke this current administration, which, has, I believe, and intensified the divisions, the racism, the sexism, the
Well,
the
they
war
they
on the poor, all of those things.
yeah.
The war on pretty much everybody except for straight white men. No, no offense to present company, but you guys seem to be the only ones that have any resonance with this administration.
Well, and it's a weird thing too because I wouldn't say I'm in the economic class that's really getting favored, you know.
Well, this is probably true.
I mean, I think he was
Unless you're hiding that billion somewhere else,
I think he just gave
overseas.
a had a fundraiser where it was $1.2 million a plate to attend. So he's not listening to my concerns about what's going on. So
Yeah. No,
um,
it's true.
let, let, in that context, maybe you could just give an update on what is happening with the consent decrees, right? Because the Justice Department said kind of put the federal one on hold, but we still have the state one. So I haven't attended any of the meetings that have kind of given updates on that, but do you feel like that's having an impact? Is that changing the dynamics in the community and in the police force?
Well, I certainly think it is helping to change the dynamics within the police force. And as you know, a big part of what the state settlement was to really, you know, change the way policing and public safety happens in our community. They wanted us to, add a mental health response. And fortunately, we had already embarked upon that prior to coming to agreement to terms with the state. So that was underway. They wanted us to create other alternatives to policing, like the violence interrupters, which comes with its own set of challenges and
Yeah.
um, interesting
Yeah, I mean,
machinations.
I'm hopeful that Amanda Harrington, who's taken over that job, can kind of make some real progress in, adding some stability and transparency with that program.
Yeah, and I will say that I think she is already, and which is why now we're kind of hearing from some of the violence interrupter groups, they're feeling a little
Pushing back
uh,
some.
yeah, they're pushing back, because now we do have some guardrails, some regulations, some training, because I think a big part of it was just, they didn't necessarily have the training and skills to do the administrative work, to do the, documentation of, how many hours and what people were doing, etc. So Director Harrington is putting um, some
Those
of those things in place.
I mean, I think what would help the community be more accepting is if there are some better metrics around, what exactly they're doing, like how many contacts they're making, in some way showing that they're out there building trust within the community and helping to reduce violence. I mean, it's hard to look at some of the recent shootings and things that have occurred, and then kind of it does make you wonder, like, are they having an impact, you know? And I will sort of see this summer what happens with gun violence and stuff and violence in general. But, you know, hopefully the ones that are getting their act together and are putting people out there will have a real impact on reducing violence we see in the city.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I do think that, they are having impact sort of anecdotally and um but we need those documentations, we need those metrics in place to understand how effective these groups are and you know and to ensure that we're getting the best bang for the buck, if you
Mhm.
will. But them being in community, them being visible, we see them in a lot of our grocery stores and um, downtown, which I think has become, safer. Like some of the violence that we're seeing, like you mentioned these shootings from last week. I mean, these are targeted personal, so it's not like random people just, um, running up and robbing, although there was one of those last week too, downtown. And then the awful teenager situation that happened, the 14-year-olds, 17-year-olds that um, were shooting at each other and one died. But we've been implementing a lot of the things that have been outlined by the enforceable agreement with the Department of Human Rights. And we also have a monitoring group, Oliva, that is overseeing that process. And they are coming back with some fairly positive results. What I would say is, I think the uptick in officer recruitment that we're seeing is a positive sign. We're seeing more officers or more potential officers applying to become officers. We have some pretty large classes of cadets that will be coming online in the coming months. And as you know, it takes quite a while to go from yes, you're hired to completing training and actually being out on the streets.
Yeah.
So, you don't always see it in real time. But
And, you know, you need,
I feel like we're on a, a good trajectory in that regard, but building community um, trust is still very, very much a fragile situation.
yeah. And I hope that the activities that are planned around, his death do kind of move things forward in terms of trust and, um, people being committed to making positive, steps forward. So what did, it's been kind of controversial though, the George Floyd Square, and whether it stays open, or these different plans that have been presented. And there was a lot of community feedback that said we want buses running on the street. We want
Mhm.
kind of to go back to life as normal. And some of the other council members kind of put the brakes on that and said, no, we need to keep listening to more people. I don't know if you have any thoughts on what's happening there.
Yeah, well, I was really frustrated with that process. I don't think the plan that was presented and supported by about 70% of the people that um, participated in the surveys and the focus groups and all of the convenings that we did was to keep things as normal, or go back to normal. What people were saying is, we want to honor George Floyd. We want to build a memorial. But we also want the streets, transit to be able to flow through. We want, cars to be able to flow through, because we already recognize the challenges that cutting off a street brings, as evidenced by Nicollet Avenue, which we are now spending millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to reopen.
Yeah.
And so why would we go back and do that? Chicago Avenue is a major thoroughfare in the city of Minneapolis. The D line goes through 6 different communities. The people that live along the D line, a large percentage are transit dependent. We need public transportation to be able to flow through George Floyd Square. So, I thought it was a really great compromise, that we have flexibility. We can close that square when we needed to. And the plan would reconstruct the whole intersection, take out all of the lead piping underground, plant trees, improve the lighting. I mean, it's what this community needs and deserves. 38th in Chicago hasn't been reconstructed in over 50 plus years. It really requires that kind of investment. And, it kind of boggles my mind that my colleagues would, support all these other projects all around the city, but hold this community to a different standard, particularly after, a vast majority of people said this is how we want to proceed. So I was really frustrated with that process. But, elections have consequences. And they, the majority of the council spoke. And so, we have to go with that. I think in the long run, we will probably find out that the pedestrian mall is not a practical solution in that area. And
What's
we'll be back to where we started.
and
But
what's
the one challenge in that, though, is right now and prior, we had the resources to do it. Now I'm really concerned that with this new administration that is clawing back resources, particularly around infrastructure projects, and even though there was no federal dollars, involved in the reconstruction of 38th Street, 38th in Chicago, but there are other projects all around the city. We're doing like 55 different construction projects all around the city. Those things require money. So if we don't do the George Floyd Square now, there's a potential that in the future we will need to use that money for something else. And then George Floyd Square gets short shrifted again.
Yeah.
And I just think, as a council members, we have to have a long range view. We cannot live in just this short term reality. And that's kind of the viewpoint that I was trying to bring to the table. But again, like I said,
Yeah.
Elections do have
They have
consequences.
consequences, and I wonder how much of, the current election is playing into that. Are, some counselors maybe motivated more by making the mayor look bad and making themselves look in opposition to him rather than really being concerned about the long-term success and comeback of that intersection.
Well, I will say this to that point. It is a political year and people are trying to get reelected.
Yeah,
Yeah, and they will do things. And yeah, for some reason, the council has made the mayor the enemy, the boogeyman. And, or I should say the majority of the council. And that's kind of who, it's not like they're running against their opponent. It's like they're running against the mayor,
right. Yep.
which is mind-boggling.
Well, that's their foil, right? Maybe it's a way of kind of trying to highlight their own agendas and ideas by contrasting them with the mayor. And I mean, I know, all the vetoes and overrides and things that have taken place. I, I think they take a lot of pride in that. So, um, but let's
You,
talk about what's good about being a council person. I mean, you've been there for a while. What are some of the for all these people who are running for office? I mean, what do you find rewarding about being a council member?
well, I mean, it certainly is an opportunity to help improve your neighborhood and community. It is, a deep honor um, to be a representative in representative government. I mean, to have the faith of 30,000 plus people to to try to bring forth a collective voice, which is challenging, right? Because you have to listen to everybody and then you have to try to synthesize all of those ideas into something that can help to move policy forward. And, you know, going into that process, you're not going to please everybody. And I kind of wanted to bring this up a little bit ago around, the thing with the infrastructure at George Floyd Square. You know, Terry, in politics, and I'm sure you're aware of this, it's all about compromise, and that has become this really nasty, dirty word
Right.
in American politics, in Minneapolis politics. Um, but if there's no compromise, then there's a dictatorship. That's what the result of not compromising is.
Right.
And unfortunately, we have a good majority of the council that is ideological and unwilling to to compromise, and consequently, you see this record number of vetoes.
Yeah. Well, and there's a real resentment that the city chose the strong mayor system too, right? Like um, that comes up. I think it was in Payne's like initial speech when he got elected as president of the
It's
council
every
that,
time he opens his mouth,
yeah.
he's referring back, he's relitigating that outcome.
And I feel like the city chose that because what we had, I mean, first of all, it's pretty common system across cities, but also it kind of maybe led to people having fiefdoms, if you will, 13 different fiefdoms, and maybe not a lot of consistency in how budgeting got done and things like that. But they They're not happy with it, the majority of the
No,
council.
no, they are not. And in my mind, in which, I was pretty open about it to the consternation of some other folks, but I really do think we need to have some real accountability that we can point to because in the previous, and it was 100+ years of doing it, and we lived with it as a city, but it was always, the council pointing at the mayor and the mayor pointing at the council, and look, nothing would get done. I always said we were just a really lucky city in that, we were able to move forward in that sort of weird hybrid kind of government structure. Um, but as you stated, we are now kind of in line with the majority of the large cities in the country are, strong mayor systems.
Yeah.
Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, Portland, you name it, all across the country. And because you got to have some level of where the buck actually stops.
Well, and it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, in the current system, a large function of what the city council does is really just approving spending for others to do work, right? Like, um,
Well, we
it,
we certainly approve spending, but um, we develop the budget. I mean, the mayor proposes his budget, we approve it, but we also have a role in setting the agenda, if you will, and the priorities for the city. Um, so, I think that's an important function. I will say that I think we have been, because of the pandemic, because of the unrest that was created by George Floyd, and that we have not, as a city, been able to really devote the kind of time and energy to strategic planning that I think the city deserves in terms of promoting a path forward. So we're still kind of working on sort of the strategic goals that we set forth maybe 5 years ago. And not that those goals were, I mean, it was public safety, affordable housing, and making sure people are able to stay in their homes, and youth. I mean, we're still making progress on those things, but, we could be even further sharpening the goals on how to maintain that. But, I think we have been making some significant progress on housing, building more housing is the answer to the housing shortage. I mean, I
yeah.
don't know how else, you even address that situation. We've been able to maintain sort of stabilize rents more so than any place in the country. And we look at our neighbors across the river, and they just rolled back their rent
Right.
stabilization policies um, because they have been kind of having a negative and deleterious impact on the scenario, on the situation,
Yeah.
rather than solving anything,
Do you
So,
think where would you put the likelihood after this next election of rent stabilization in Minneapolis coming back up? Is that, I mean, it was voted
I would
down.
say it's probably about 35%.
Okay.
It didn't come up in this 2-year term.
Yeah.
But I do think because there will be a shift in the council, right? We know that there are three open seats, and I think there's some pretty competitive races out there. So there will be some change on the council. And yeah, that would be my prediction.
So, I hear you about the focusing in, and I think one of the things I'd like to see more of from all the candidates is kind of what is that vision, so you're getting a 4-year term. What do you want the city to look like at the end of your term that's different from like right now? So I hope we hear more from candidates in that regard. Oh, and I would say the same of like the DFL party, the Minneapolis DFL. I sometimes I struggle because I'm like, well, what's the vision that you have? What does it look like? And I don't know if you have any thoughts about what has happened with the DFL party itself in Minneapolis. The chairman resigned, and how these conventions are going. Do you have any thoughts on those things you'd like to share? You can.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm really not quite sure where the Minneapolis DFL is is headed. It seems like it has been sort of some people may say infiltrated, some people may say hijacked uh, by you know a further left contingency, um, and namely by the Democratic Socialists of America, which, in my mind, I look at as a political party.
Yeah.
Uh, I know nationally that it is a political party, but I talk to DFL leadership and they say, "Oh, it's just another caucus of the DFL party," which I guess I can see that, but why have a party label then, right? Um, the one thing that I do respect about Robin Wansley, she did not seek the DFL endorsement. She's very clear. I uphold the values of the Democratic Society of America or Democratic Socialists of America. A number of other candidates for city council have been endorsed by the Democratic Socialists of America. Um, Interestingly, I had this conversation with the now DFL endorsed candidate for Ward 8. And, he said that, he doesn't see himself as a DSA candidate. But I'm saying, well, when I was campaigning, they never reached out to me to seek their endorsement. Um, they and I don't. Did they reach out to you to seek their endorsement? Did you get a
Nobody
invitation?
reached out to me.
I'm just like, who is? They are only, sort of selecting people who they feel like will uphold their values, right?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, you know how it works. I don't have really that deep understanding of how the whole endorsement process works. I mean, a lot of unions will endorse people. It doesn't seem like there's like a questionnaire or a forum where all the candidates go and kind of give their position, and then these different organizations pick somebody. It feels more like they've already worked out a deal with somebody and the other candidates don't even have a shot, right? Um,
Well, that in some ways that is true, but I know as I was running, I would get invitations from all of these organizations saying, "Hey, please fill out our questionnaire um, to for our endorsement." I mean, I never like called up a group and said, "Hey, I wanna
I
I
want to
wanna
be,
participate in
yeah.
your endorsement process." They've reached out to me. Um, and I kind of think that's how it goes in
It's just a questionnaire. And I mean, I filled out plenty of questionnaires and basically I felt like they just sort of went in a black hole. But
yeah,
so tell
yeah.
me, the endorsements are part of it, but do you think there's been any shifts in the political climate now from when you first ran, say in 2017? Is it different or is it still the same?
I think it's different. I think it's different. I think there is, I think COVID has had a really significant impact on our society, and I think it's understated. We still have yet to really understand the full impact of what COVID has created, but I think it has, because it uncovered so much of the inequities in our society, and then the murder of George Floyd. I think, particularly here in Minneapolis, we have shifted further to the left as on a whole, which is why it is mind-boggling that there is this really significant divide.
Yeah.
It's almost like Republicans versus Democrats. But we have to be in the top five most quote progressive cities in the country.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, you know,
That's why I almost wish whether it was for mayor or some of the city council races, I wish a Republican or an independent would actually run just so that people would see how big a gap there is between uh, some of the more moderate candidates who are very liberal on their own, but
yeah,
there isn't anyone to the right to like show how liberal they are, right? So they get kind of attacked as being Republicans or something when they're so far away from that. And
yeah. Well, I feel like I'm that candidate,
but
Terry.
that's because there was no one to the
To my
right.
right. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
so we mentioned the budget a little bit. Last year it was pretty ugly what happened. I mean, what do you think people should expect this year? I mean, is it going to be the same bumpy process, or is there going to be a little bit more collaboration between the council and the mayor? Or
I will hope that it will be more collaboration. I, but I think that because it's a
election year?
election year,
Yeah.
that, you're going to have a lot of um, grandstanding and a lot of finger pointing and et cetera. Um, Even though when we finalize the budget, the election will be over. But even at that point, you know, sometimes the losing candidates, if they have lost, they might try to hijack or,
Right. They could
and
really,
I wouldn't, I'm not casting dispersions, but I'm just saying that kind of is human nature sometimes, um, but it's going to be a much more challenging environment this time around.
okay. So, yeah, the budget could be rocky again this year, but what sort of priorities or items will you be championing?
Um, I really am still really focused on, you know, 38th Street as a whole, George Floyd Square, trying to make sure we are, resourcing those concerns, affordable housing, addressing the homelessness issues, are going to be my concern. You know, Terry, I have to be really honest. In budgeting, I have approached it as, you know, what are the needs in the community more so than I want to, what ID, what what ideological concern I want to move forward, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah, well, so and I want to also ask about guaranteed basic income. I mean, this was something when we were on the stage debating together. I think we both agreed on, and there was that pilot that the city did. It never seems to make it into the
and
press.
we've expanded it. We've expanded it to every public school in the city now. Um,
Guaranteed basic income.
well, guaranteed basic income in terms of we're primarily doing it through project say stable homes, stable schools. So
Well, I mean it in terms of, and that is a good program. It seems like it's been very successful. But I mean more like they chose certain zip codes and people applied, and then they got, I think, like $500 a month for 2 years. And the funding for it was, I think, part of the ARPA dollars, the federal COVID dollars. And it was, it's coming to an end if it hasn't already. And I know the Fed put out a report on it, about how successful it has been. And to me, I find that idea really interesting in that, there's kind of a choice between we're going to fund programs to help these people in need versus just giving those people direct aid. But I don't know, maybe you have a different interpretation of it.
oh, I mean, that is exactly what it is. And I'm still a very strong proponent of universal basic income. I think we have to trust people to be able to know where their resources need to go. All the studies indicate that primarily people are spending it on housing and or, food and basic necessities. Um, so yeah, I'm still 100% in support of that. You know, we use sort of the one-time ARPA dollars to kind of set that up. The in the
Is there
I
any
guess
chance that a continuation of it will appear in the city's budget, or that there's some other way that it will get funded, with those ARPA dollars going away?
I would hope so, but that would entail increasing property taxes. I know there is some proposals in, I think Soren mentioned taxing people in over $200,000 tax bracket, which really concerns me. I mean, I just know for a fact that people making $200,000, they're paying their taxes.
Yeah.
I could maybe get behind a $500,000, but and even probably those folks are paying their fair share of taxes
Yeah.
too. but maybe they could pay a little bit more. But the $200,000 threshold, it seems unfair to me to um,
Well, it's
to
interesting because so Steve Brandt has been on the board of estimate and taxation, has been kind of making the rounds for that city income tax, 1% on people earning over 200,000. And so I interviewed him and posted the article out there, and I got a lot of feedback on it. You
yeah.
know, and it's been pretty interesting. I think a lot of people agree that that 200,000 might be too low. I mean, especially for families who are trying to pay for education and of course people who are making that much are usually at an age too where they're not just taking care of their own kids, but they're taking care of their parents, right?
Parents.
So
Yeah.
a lot of people are caught, and I know I would be in that category.
I
Of
know that I am in that category. I got a single mom, daughter, and three grandkids, and I have an 83-year-old mother.
yeah.
So, I'm in that category. And yeah, I don't have extra money to pay more taxes, right? Like it's gonna hurt.
But in my mind, with the
So
to get the funding for some kind of universal basic income, it's you're diverting funds that are already being spent on other programs, if that's possible, right? So if you're, say, putting money into affordable housing, maybe that money into some sort of program, maybe that program gets reduced in order to give the money directly to people. And looking at ways to shift how we're spending the money as opposed to just adding new money into the picture is kind of the thinking.
yeah, no, I think that's a reasonable expectation. Though there's not a whole lot of fat. I mean, essentially, what you're saying is cut the fat. And there's just not a lot there.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, some people might say, well, the, public safety apparatus is pretty much, you know, soaking up all the money. Maybe you can get some from there. Or public works. So the two biggest budget items are public safety and public works. Do we want to take money from those and reallocate it to, direct payments to folks, and that's a policy debate to have. Um,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I,
I guess
I I do think the city's responsibility is to maintain our infrastructure and our streets, and to provide public safety. Um, those are kind of two of the main responsibilities of city government. Um,
you
you
wouldn't know
know,
that though by listening to the candidates. I,
right. No, you wouldn't know that at all. They think we're Hennepin County and we should be doing all the social service work. And that's not the role of this city's government.
yeah.
Like, Hennepin County is responsible to make sure that people aren't sleeping on the streets, to make sure that kids get educated, to make sure that, people stay healthy. Like, that's their job. And we should be holding them accountable to do that work.
I mean, that's such a great point. And even, as I realize now, like maybe if there is a guaranteed basic income, it should be on the county level. And I feel like the county is, no one ever talks about Hennepin County. I mean, they have a bigger budget than the city, and And I also would love to see the state giving more money back to the city. I know I've heard the mayor talk about local government aid. I don't know what kind of leverage we have over the state, which seems to be none with the divided government there. But it does seem like the city council
Will
needs
tell you
to.
we have very little leverage over that conversation,
But
in my
for to
opinion.
put some real boundaries on what's a city responsibility versus what's the county, and kind of trying to stay in our lane a little bit as opposed to continuing to raise property taxes for things that maybe are not a city function, or where the city is doubling up efforts that the county is already doing, like some of the different training programs and things of that nature that might be done at the county level, or where it seems like there's some duplication happening.
There is, and to be fair, I mean, there are 87 cities in Hennepin County. And so, while Minneapolis is the biggest city in Hennepin County, they can't direct all their resources to Minneapolis, right? They got to look out for Burnsville and, um, you know, Golden Valley, Edina,
Yeah,
St. Louis Park, etc. So, um, to that end, we do need some of our own training programs. And even though it is the county's responsibility to deal with homelessness, I mean, they're homeless on our streets, right?
yeah.
So, it becomes, it's like, if
You
sewer
don't.
water backs up into your house, yeah, it's the city's problem, but it's also your problem too, because
Mhm.
now you got this stinky water in your house and you got to get it out one way or the other. And so that's
That's
kind of how it's like all of these homeless people, yes, it's the county's responsibility, but they built an encampment next door to Terry, and they're not calling Angela Conley. They're calling Andrea Jenkins saying, hey,
right. Yeah,
I got 8 people living in my backyard. Like, what are you going to do about it? So we kind of have to, you know, take some responsibility for helping. And the same with the the addiction problem, the same with the public safety issues. I mean, they are city challenges that we have to play a role in dealing with too. And it should be a strong collaboration, as you are suggesting, with the city, the county, and the state. But it doesn't always translate that way. And then what do you do in those scenarios? You got to do what you got to do. You kind of have to try to step up,
well, that's a great
build
analogy. The sewer water is that's a good one. So before we kind of close things out here, is there any topics that we didn't cover that you wanted to touch on, or did we cover it all?
well, we covered quite a bit, I think. But I think one of your questions was, what do I hope that the incoming council members continue to focus on? And I really think that 38th Street is and 38th in Chicago / George Floyd Square is the soul of the city of Minneapolis. And I hope that my successors will continue to focus energy in redeveloping 38th Street, and really lean into George Floyd Square and try to make that a a national and international
Feature.
representation of social justice and racial justice and racial healing that I think we need, and I know we need in our city and in our country. And try to rebuild the economic development of that corridor in that area, And, you know, I hope that people will be considerate and mindful of the least of the people that live in our community and try to lift up, those boats. I hope that people will continue to push for and try to find solutions for how we do extend and maintain our guaranteed basic income programs, because I think that's gonna have to play a part of the future of this this country, and considering how all of the safety net systems are being sort of dismantled right now.
Yeah.
Again, not our problem necessarily to solve, but it's happening in our community. And so, what do? We got the stinky sewer water, and then we got to get it out.
And like
So.
there was, I don't know what you thought of him, but Andrew Yang, he had an idea for bringing about universal basic income. And one of the
Mhm.
things about his argument that I found persuasive was there's automation is taking place. The nature of work itself is changing,
Yeah.
and it's hard to predict like which jobs are going to still be here in 5 years, right? Like even if you go to say a McDonald's, there's like fewer people that work there as they've automated order taking and all these other things. So it's like how do to me, like the universal basic income allows, in some ways, for this country to keep moving, even as what jobs are available might be changing, is kind of one argument for it, which I thought Andrew Yang did a good job of talking to that.
Yeah, no, I thought I did too, but economists have been talking about universal basic income for about almost 50 years now.
Hmm.
Um, and in some countries, I think it is being implemented. Um, I think it would, boy, here's where racism comes into the scenario. I believe that if this was a sort of homogenous society, we would have universal basic health care. We would have um, free college. But because, and primarily it's black people, but black and brown people, the society is like, no, that's a handout. That's a giveaway, even though we know that that making sure you have a healthy society is critical to how the society is going to operate and perpetuate itself.
Yeah.
Um, you need people to work to produce things. Um, you need people to work to
Well,
service things like but if you're working to pay for your health insurance, you're just kind of living in this perpetual cycle of poverty.
yeah.
Um,
Well, and
and
and along those lines, it's like I feel like we've definitely allowed the more conservative elements in our society to define how we talk about things. And in terms of, people seeing basic income as a handout, it's like, well, what you're really doing is preventative medicine, right? You're kind of keeping from having those really expensive problems later on by spending the money preventatively. And I also like one of the people who kind of criticized me for talking about it. I think of it almost more as like Social Security, which almost everyone thinks Social Security is a great program, right? Like nobody wants to see elderly just incomeless and
Well, there are some people, the Republicans right now, and they have thought about it forever. It's just
yeah.
that, nobody has had the guts to try to end it until now. So there are some people, Terry, that don't think it's a good
Well,
idea.
I guess my hope is that we can have a talk about these programs that's kind of, and this is me being naive, that's somewhat nonpartisan and more just around like the math, right? Like,
Yeah,
can we make the math work, yes or no? And instead of putting a bunch of labels on people or those kind of things, like let's just see if the math works and where it works. Sort of my hope, but again, I'm probably being naive.
well, no, I mean, I'm then naive too because I would subscribe to that same theory. Like that's what I'm saying. Like if we had universal health care, that would make the math work.
Yeah,
But you know, we have too many medical lobbyists who want to keep the systems the same, and these record breaking profits that people are making off of people's misery.
yeah,
It's it's actually unconscionable and
yeah.
um
I had Hudson.
oh,
Oh, I think the whole parade of my family's coming home, so we should.
yep, I gotta get going. I got a very busy afternoon. So
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk to me. I really enjoyed it. So,
yeah, same here. Same here.
uh,
And yeah, we will I'm sure
hopefully
we'll
we'll
be
talk
seeing each
again
other
before.
out here on the campaign trail or whatever,
All
or
right.
just in community generally.
Absolutely.
All
Maybe
right,
I'll
Terry.
have a good day. Bye.
Yeah, bye bye.